everyone. It's so nice to see you here. It's a beautiful day out, but it's an even more beautiful event in. So thank you for making the trip up, and welcome to the Lenfest Center for the Arts at Columbia University. I'm Sarah Cole. I'm the Dean of the School of the Arts, and I'm just so happy to see you all here tonight for this really lovely and special occasion. We have truly extraordinary people who are going to be speaking with us tonight, Jaquira Díaz and Edwidge Danticat, two incredible writers, artists, and Columbia faculty members. And they're here to talk together about Jaquira Díaz's new novel and her first novel, This Is the Only Kingdom, a novel. Jaquira has agreed to give us the pleasure of listening to some of that work tonight. So she's going to come up here and read, and then the two of them will sit in those well-placed red chairs to talk a little bit, and then we will have time for questions from the audience. So I hope you'll be thinking of things you want to ask or share. I want to thank Book Culture for being here. There's not a human person there right now, but they do consist of human people. I'm more and more happy when humanity is in person, and there's no AI being in that chair. So thank them for bringing books, and Jaquira has said that she would be happy to sign some books at the end of the evening. So this is not in my written remarks, but I keep waiting for the moment when I don't have to preface every event by saying the world is really awful. So we're not there yet. But I do just want to say that I was thinking on my way over here tonight. Well, earlier today, I went to visit one of our former students from the visual arts program in her studio uptown. And there she was working with these amazing, beautiful paintings, which grew out of the work that she did here. And I was thinking as I was coming over here today that there's almost nothing in the world that I think is better and more important than reading a great novel. And there's almost nothing in the world that is better and more impressive than writing those novels for the rest of us. It's a way to grapple with the biggest, hardest, most challenging, most complex, most difficult, and also most wonderful and beautiful parts of human experience. And it's a way to uplift us all and to educate us and to challenge us and to affirm our collective humanity. So it's just such an amazing thing to spend an evening with great writers like these two and to remember that what they do is not easy. It's not often validated by our society, but we are so enriched by such work, and I'm so grateful to be here with them tonight. So you're going to be hearing from and about the book, so I'm not going to preview it here, but I will say that it is moving and exciting to see the admiration that this novel is generating in its first few months of life. We were talking earlier about how Jaquira has been asked to come to many, many places around the country and maybe the world to talk about it. This beautiful multi-generational novel is going to have a huge impact, I predict, and I'm so happy that you'll all be able to hear a little bit of it this evening. So I'm going to give just a very abbreviated version of the bios of these two presenters, since I know you're not here to spend the next 2 hours hearing all of their accomplishments, but I encourage you to take a read of your printed program, and also, more importantly, read their books, go online, check them out, learn about these extraordinary people. So Jaquira Díaz is an assistant professor of writing at Columbia University School of the Arts. In addition to this new novel we are celebrating tonight, she's the author of Ordinary Girls, a memoir, which is a winner of a Whiting Award, a Florida Book Awards Gold Medal, a Lambda Literary Awards finalist, and a whole slew of other awards and nominations. She has won many fellowships and prizes, including fellowships from MacDowell, Yaddo, the Kenyon Review, Breadloaf, Sewanee, and more. She's written for many journals, such as The Atlantic, The Guardian, and T, the New York Times Style magazine. That's the one that impresses me most. And her work has been anthologized in such high-profile collections as the Best American Essays and the Pushcart Prize anthology. She's also co-executive producer of Ordinary Girls, a TV series currently in development. Hello, you two. So nice to see the community joining here tonight. And most importantly, as I already said, she's a beloved professor in the writing program in the School of the Arts and a treasured colleague. Edwidge Danticat is the One Son Tam Mellon Professor of the Humanities in the Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies at Columbia. and we're so lucky to have her here as a colleague at Columbia. She's the author of, as this thing says right here, 18 books, including, so really it's going to be very abbreviated, Breath, Eyes, Memory, an Oprah Book Club selection, Crick Crack, a National Book Award finalist, and a major event when that happened, as I'm sure we all remember. The Farming of Bones, an American Book Award winner, and then the novels in stories, that's how it's described here, The Dew Breaker, Claire and the Sea Light, and The Art of Death, which is a National Book Critic Awards finalist for criticism. I tried to cut out a lot of these awards so I wouldn't trip over them all, but there are many, many, many. She's written 7 books for children and young adults, a travel narrative, and 2 essay collections. Her memoir, Brother, I'm Dying, was a 2007 finalist for the National Book Award and a 2008 winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award for autobiography. She's also the author of a number of collections, children's books and story collections, including the award-winning Everything Inside. She's won every award, as I mentioned, there is, including a fellowship from the Ford Foundation, the Penn Malamud Award for Excellence in the Short Story, and a MacArthur Fellowship. Also, as of a few weeks ago, she just received the Penn Nabokov Award for Achievement in International Literature. So, without further ado, please welcome these 2 great artists to our program and Jaquira Díaz to come up and read. And thank you again for coming.
Thank you all so much for being here. It is such an honor to actually be in conversation with a literal genius, the Edwidge Danticat. I can't believe I get to say this, but it's true. If you haven't read Edwidge Danticat's work, please do. When I read The Dew Breaker years and years and years ago, I was shocked. And then I read Create Dangerously, and I felt like it gave me permission to do the kind of work I actually wanted to do and to think about my people back home and actually take some risks. So read her. And I'm going to be reading from This Is the Only Kingdom. In the beginning of the novel, I guess what you need to know is that it's a multi-generational family story that follows 4 different characters. The 2 main characters are Mari Carmen and her daughter Nena. And I'm going to read from Mari Carmen's perspective. And yeah, that's it. This is the only kingdom. That summer, as Mari Carmen and Loli served food and drinks in El Paseo, they spent more and more time with the guys. Mari Carmen got used to seeing Rey during her shift, to feeling his eyes on her as she cleared a table, as she picked up the bills and coins left for her by customers, as she wiped the tables and chairs. One Saturday afternoon, as she placed drinks on a table, Loli caught her eye from the bar. Loli's eyes were wide as she mouthed the words, "Look, Rey," and pointed toward the band. Mari Carmen held her empty tray with one hand, like she'd forgotten what to do, then caught herself. She took the tray back to the bar, dropped it on the counter for the bartender, and watched the band. El Paseo was full, customers sitting at every table, sipping their drinks, smiling and swaying to the music. They started with the keyboards, and she recognized the chords immediately. They were covering Cheo Feliciano's El Ratón. But what struck her was that it was Rey on the mic, about to sing. She'd never heard him sing. Loli was hopping around on her feet, ready to dance. She couldn't help her excitement, Mari realized. They smiled at each other nervously. Nobody had heard Rey sing with the band before. This was a first for all of them. As Rey leaned toward the mic, the scar above his left eye visible in the spotlight, Ismael played the congas, a soft, steady beat accompanying the keyboards. The whole restaurant went quiet, only the sounds of the music. Mari Carmen's heart hammered in her chest. And then, when Rey sang, "Mi gato se está quejando, que no puede vacilar," I'm not going to sing, the crowd sprang, clapping and woohooing like they were listening to a star. Everybody loved Cheo Feliciano, especially this song, and everybody loved Rey's cover. They scanned the crowd, all the customers singing along like they were at a concert. They weren't just They weren't just at a restaurant by the beach. They had been transported. The horns blaring, the bass's low rhythmic rumbling, the stroke of Ismael's congas. Rey closed his eyes and sang, his body swaying. He was there, but he wasn't, Mari Carmen realized. He was somewhere else, somewhere far, far away. He was feeling every note, not at a beachside restaurant with guys from the neighborhood. When Rey sang, his voice was aimed at the sky, at her, at every woman sitting there watching. He was lifting them up with his song. They were flying. And as she listened, Mari Carmen grasped something about his body, about the way he moved, how her own body would feel against his, underneath his weight. It was then, for the first time in her life, that she understood something about love, the ache deep in her chest, Rey in front of that mic, everything she wanted, the scar on his face like a reminder of how she had held him, and how come he never wanted to sing when he'd always had that voice inside him, that voice, that song, how it pulled at the seams of her. He seemed so out of reach then. If she tried to touch him, would he disappear? He wasn't hers. She saw that then. He was everybody's, and he would be a star. He would never be hers. Even though she loved him, she understood that she also hated him. Just a little, just enough for it to hurt. Later that night, after they closed up the restaurant, Mari Carmen and Loli swept and mopped up the floors, wiped off every table and chair, cleaned the restrooms, washed all the glasses at the bar, and counted their tips. "Are the guys waiting for us?" Loli asked. Mari Carmen nodded. She picked up her purse from where it usually sat on the bottom shelf behind the bar. She hadn't said a word to Loli most of the night. She'd avoided her, avoided Rey, talking only to customers when it was expected. She couldn't really explain why, but after the band played their set, she needed time to think. "They're out there smoking weed, aren't they?" Loli asked. She stuffed her tips into the front pockets of her shorts. Mari Carmen folded her stack of bills, put it in her purse, then threw the strap over her shoulder. "Remember," she said, "when Mommy asks, one of the girls from work dropped us off. Don't even think to mention weed or the guys, and especially not Rey." "Do you think I'm an idiot?" Mari Carmen patted Loli's back, smiled. "Nah, you're the smart one." They rode to El Caserío in the back of Cano's van, the guys and Loli laughing their asses off, Mari Carmen sitting quietly on the floor, her arms hugging her knees. She felt every bump, her butt bouncing on the hard metal floor, her back against the side of the van. Rey sat next to her, laughing with the rest of the guys. As she watched him, watched all of them, she felt that hollow in the pit of her stomach again. Their time together would end. It was just a matter of when. In El Caserío, Cano parked his van in front of Rey's building, and everyone got out. Mari Carmen went into her purse and pulled out a few dollars. "Hang on," she said to Loli. Loli turned back to her. "What's up?" She put the small stack in Loli's hand. "Tell Mommy I had to stay late and that one of the girls will drop me off later." "What?" Loli inspected the money, folded it, and stuffed it in her pocket. "You can't bribe me." "Just do it. Tell her they asked me to help clean. Tell her it's for the money." Loli shook her head, punched her softly on the shoulder. "You better be home in an hour." Mari Carmen hugged Loli. Rey waited for her by the stairs. The guys already scattered back to their own apartments. Together, Mari Carmen and Rey watched Loli cross the street, then turn the corner, disappear around one of the buildings. Rey took Mari Carmen's hand, led her up the stairs. Inside Rey's apartment, she let him pull her past the living room where his uncle Ojeda was asleep on the couch and into his bedroom. His mom and Tito must have been asleep, she thought, since she didn't hear any sounds coming from Doña Iris's bedroom. Ray shut the door behind them and sat on the bed. She let him pull her close. They kissed for a while, Ray pressing against her, his lips soft against hers. She pulled back slightly, then tried to breathe. She was out of breath, she realized. This was all too fast. A couple of hours ago, she'd been watching him on stage, and he'd been a boy with the whole world in the palm of his hand, who could get whatever he wanted, whoever he wanted. And now they were here on his bed. "You all right?" he asked. No, she wanted to say. No, she was not all right. He was a shooting star and she was just a girl on his bed. What the hell had she been thinking? He kissed her again, softly, then smiled. "We don't have to do anything. Just be here with me." He put his arms around her and pulled her in for a hug. She didn't know how to tell him what she wanted, that she wanted him, that she wanted everything. "Hey," Ray said, taking her face in his hands. "It's you and me and no one else." He caressed the side of her face, put his hands in her hair. She liked the sound of that. Ray and Mari. "You're mine then," she said. "I'm yours." He kissed her again. She relaxed, finally, and decided she didn't need to say the words. She could just take what she wanted. She looked into his eyes, ignored the way she felt, like she was just some simple girl who cleaned apartments around the neighborhood, who waited tables and put up with drunk men hitting on her all night for the possibility of a $2 tip. She wasn't just a girl. She was his girl, and he was hers. She pulled her shirt up over her head, tossed it aside. He stripped his own shirt off quickly. She reached down and unbuttoned his jeans. She was a woman, and he was a man, and they were in each other's arms, and they were two kids out in front of her building, trying to talk to each other at a party, and he was a boy bleeding in her arms, and she was a girl pressing her hand against his bloody face, trying to keep it all inside, and they were inside each other, all sweat and hair and teeth against her neck, and she could see that he was hers. She could see everything they were, everything they would be. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Hi. Hello. Hi. Think. Hi. Should we say hi one more time?
Hi.
Thank you, Sarah, for introducing us so beautifully, and thank you for that gorgeous reading. You begin with actually two of the themes in the book that I wanted us to definitely discuss. One was music, and one is love. And so each chapter of this book begins with a salsa song, and at the end you have liner notes. And Ray's a musician, and I'm Haitian, and if I remember I had a high school boyfriend who was a musician, and my parents were like, "No, that's not going to happen." And my mom would literally, even though she didn't understand all the words, would play that song, faithfully, The Journey, and loving as music man and all it turns out to be. So you weren't brave enough to sing, and I'm like traumatizing them with my voice. But so what is the role of music in this novel? It comes through Ray's sort of aspiring career as a musician, but also in so many other ways. And how did you come up with that framing?
Oh, thank you for that question. I think I was the musician boyfriend that all the girls' parents warned them about. I studied music when I was a child, and I also have a hearing problem. I'm almost completely deaf in my left ear, and so I can't actually play music or sing, which is why I don't sing. Not to say I'm tone deaf, but I have trauma related to that. And so I spent most of my adolescence thinking that I would make music for a living, and then realized that I couldn't, and now I just write about it. And so part of it is music is always in my work in some way, including when I'm composing sentences. I think Like I have a metronome app, I think about rhythm, and I think about time signatures, and I think about composing sentences the way that musicians are writing music. And so I'm very concerned with the idea that the work shouldn't just do something that's meaningful and shouldn't just have subtext, but that the sentences should also sing. And so that was always something I was thinking about as I was writing this novel. But then there's also the origin of Rey's character came to me from a song, a salsa song, Pedro Conga's Rey el Chino, where I discovered that Rey was a real person. So I guess I have to tell you the story. When I first found out, when I heard this song when I was a little kid called Rey el Chino, it was a salsa song. It was very popular on the radio. And I was in the car with my dad, and he asked me, do you know the origins of this song? The song is about a man who had trouble with the police and he was killed. And I had no idea. And so my dad told me the story. It turns out Rey was a real person who lived in our neighborhood, where I was born, where my dad grew up, El Caserío Padre Rivera, who was killed by the police. He also had a story, which was a lot more than that, right? He had a whole life. He was beloved by the community because he was kind of a modern day Robin Hood, someone who would steal and would come back to the community and bring back like diapers and baby formula. And so everyone loved him. El Caserío was a place that was over-policed, and most of the people who live there and who live there now are Black and brown, and we were living under a kind of surveillance. And Rey was kind of a rebel who refused this idea that people should be put in their place, and he believed in like stealing to feed the poor, and everybody knew him, everybody knew that about him. And that's why the community loved him. But he was also despised by the police, and they wanted to catch him, and then the community protected him. And so when I heard this story, I found this fascinating. And I, considering myself a writer at a very young age, I always thought that I would write about him. And when I first started writing this book, I thought it would be a nonfiction book. And then I realized very quickly that it would take me like 20 years to do the research, to talk to the family, to talk to the police, to find all of these records, to actually do him justice and write a book that was nonfiction and that was focused on the real story, not what the official record said. And so I wanted to keep some of that. When I decided that I would write a novel and that I would write a character who was inspired by Rey rather than the real person, I wanted to keep something of that real story, which is what inspired it, the song. And so I thought, I'm going to make this fictional character who's based on a real person or inspired by a real person, and I'm going to make him a musician. And so the themes of music, and especially salsa in the golden era of salsa, which was very political, and salsa songs usually told stories. They were full of stories. And so I wanted that to live in the novel as a kind of tribute to him, but also it felt so important to have something that was very real to the time and place, which is salsa music, not just as a form of protest, but as something cultural that lived in every single household in the community. That was a very long answer.
No, actually, but it sort of fed this other thing I wanted to ask you about it. So when you work with nonfiction material, right, to write fiction, because I remember reading your memoir, and often when you write memoir, people think like the highest compliment they can give you is that it reads like a novel, right? I don't know if you agree with that, but what do you have a preference in genre? This is your first novel. You had a very successful memoir. So what was the process like, especially working with like that source material where the story already exists? Like what was the difference in writing those two books?
There was a huge difference. Writing a nonfiction book for me feels like a different kind of responsibility when I'm writing about real people and I'm trying to tell the truth while also understanding that not everything belongs to me, that my story is my story, but other people have their own stories, and trying to respect especially the people from the communities I write about, which are my communities, and they are often marginalized and robbed of their own stories. So it's very important to me when I'm writing nonfiction about other people that I'm not trying to tell someone else's story, that I am thinking about telling the truth, but also thinking about, am I being fair, right? And that I'm focused on justice, not just truth. And that feels like a huge sense of responsibility. And the writing is a lot of work. It's very difficult to do that and to also think about sentences and craft and setting and metaphor, while trying to remain truthful and trying to remain just. When I'm writing fiction, I am like, oh, this is like playing. Wait a minute. I still feel a sense of responsibility because I'm writing about Puerto Ricans and I'm writing about a real community. But I also feel like, oh, I have a lot more liberty to do things and change things around that serve the story because I'm not writing about real people. And so the moment I decided to turn Rey's character into a fictional version that's inspired by a real person, not the person, I felt liberated. And I was like, oh, I can just give him a family and give this family a story and then create stories that resonate with this main story. And it felt like playing. It felt like, oh, that sense of responsibility no longer feels heavy. It's different. It's still there because I'm writing about a community I really deeply care about. And I kind of have to think about approaching the work and thinking I have to serve the story, not the real people. And still from a place of curiosity, because I'm very curious about what the characters will tell me and trying to discover what stories are there that I didn't intend. Something that's happening innately in the work that wasn't necessarily deliberate. I'm looking for that, but it doesn't feel like the book might kill me, which sometimes nonfiction, yeah, it does.
So do you have, at this point, you have one of one, do you have a preference?
I do, and it depends on where I am in the world and what I'm doing. Right now, I prefer fiction because writing nonfiction was so hard, and fiction feels like, oh, I can just write a novel. How fun. But truthfully, if I'm being very honest, it's because nonfiction is more challenging and it requires a lot more work. For me, not for everyone, for me. And that work sometimes feels daunting. When I'm thinking about the empty page and I'm thinking about this project that deals with archival material and real people, that feels daunting. But I also definitely, after finishing a work of nonfiction, I feel much more accomplished.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is that, I think what you mentioned about that responsibility to other people. And, you know, when I finished Brother, I'm Dying, I gave it to my brothers to read. And I said, you know, because I'd rather have relatives than a book. So I was like, so I wanted them to like approve it in a way, right? Because we'd shared this difficult experience together. But with This Is the Only Kingdom, and you read us some of this beautiful love story, but it's not the only love story in the novel. So how do you approach like writing sort of like these different, I don't even want to say love triangles, but because they're very complicated and messy love, like what was your approach to writing these love stories, like sort of like these different love stories in the novel?
Oh, thank you for that question. So I didn't want there to be a love story. I resisted it for a very long time. I was like, no, I hate love. I was finishing this book and I was going through a divorce and I was like, I hate love. Like love isn't
sucks.
real. And then the characters just decided for me and I was like, oh, I can't fight this anymore. I have to go with this. This feels right. But I didn't want there to be any perfect love story. I wanted deeply flawed characters who had deeply flawed relationships. Even when they loved each other, they betrayed each other and let each other down. And I wanted there to be I wanted every character in the book to feel like they were not good or evil. They were just really complicated. And so their relationships had to be really complicated. And part of what the book is trying to do is talk about colonialism as a system and the place as part of the project of colonialism, and how all of these relationships, every single one of the people in the novel is affected by colonialism, and so are their relationships, and so are the ways that they view the world and navigate the world. There's, I talk about racism, colorism, homophobia, and all of these things affect every single one of us, whether or not we think it does. And so I wanted these relationships, even the love stories, to be complicated, because they were relationships between very flawed characters. What I had to do is kind of become a method actor. And pretend like writing a sex scene, a hetero sex scene, was very difficult for me, a lesbian. But I had to become a method actor and think, what would this character, if I am Mari Carmen, what would she feel in this moment when she is being kissed by this person? And I had to do this again and again. And so I'm very proud of myself writing this hetero love story, I have to say. Not to brag, but I'm very proud of myself. And I also had to do this when I was writing. There's a character who is a gay man, an effeminate gay boy who has relationships with older men. And I also had to do that for that character and kind of become a method actor and think, what would he do in this moment? And I think fiction writing requires that of us, to actually imagine ourselves as other people, which is, to me, it feels like a gift, right? To be able to imagine myself as another person who is nothing like me, or who might be like me, but sometimes think of myself as some other person living some other life. That to me feels like a gift. It gives you insight into the world. And I come out of the writing process feeling like I've grown.
I was also thinking of the love stories, like the love story between the mother and the daughter, the love story between even like the characters in their community. But talk a little bit more about colonialism, because one of it's the complication of this specific type of colonialism is that it's not something people are looking back on, right? And when they moved to Miami. And I'm reading those scenes, and it was very familiar because I lived in Miami for so long. But there was also this feeling like, okay, people are treating them like they just came from another country, right? Like they were coming from part of the United States, and we saw that whole debate with Bad Bunny. So talk about this specific kind of colonialism and in the lives of these characters.
Yes, thank you for that very specific question. So part of what happens in the novel is we get kind of a history lesson without, I hope without the book being didactic, but we learn that these characters who come from this place, El Caserío Padre Rivera, were displaced there. They didn't always live there. They were mostly black and brown, and they lived on the coast, or they lived in what seemed to the government at the time as desirable land. And because they were poor, the government stepped in and said, you cannot live here anymore. They claimed eminent domain and moved them and displaced them to the housing projects, which were built for people who were displaced and for the poor. And they were built in undesirable places where there were factories, and so there were factories that were breathing pollution right into their community. And so people had to live here and also couldn't get jobs. And if they didn't have cars, they couldn't actually travel anywhere. So they were stuck in this system of poverty that they couldn't get out of unless they were lucky, unless they had someone actually help them. And so this all has to do with the relationship with the U.S., because this government structure it's a colonial government. I don't know how much we all know about Puerto Rico's relationship with the U.S., but it's a very specific system. And the housing projects were built, and kind of they promote a kind of cycle of poverty that you can't really get out of there unless you have help. And so I wanted to write about this particular place because I know this place very well, and how these American factories, in this case, it was an American sugar factory, or La Central, which is what it's called, that was built in this community because it was poor and nobody could actually say anything about it. They didn't have a choice of what was built there. And it went unchecked, and they had controlled burns, and people just lived day in and day out with this pollution. I'm talking about not just colonialism, but also environmental racism and the ways that they were all stuck there. And a lot of the novel also has to do with labor, particularly women's labor, and how women have to work, not just at home, but also they have to go out and work, and then they come home and work some more. And the men, as you heard, are in a band. And so part of what I am trying to say is that colonialism is a system, yes, and the systemic poverty is a system as well, and those are interconnected. And then what happens in El Caserío, where the women work and they have to perform this labor outside of the home and then come back and perform labor at home, that's also interconnected. And all of these different systems like racism and colorism and homophobia, those are also interconnected. All of these things are interconnected, and they affect every single person in the book and the ways that they live and love. Particularly the relationship between mother-daughter becomes very strained because we have a Mari Carmen, who's a single mother, who is trying to take care of her daughter, and Tito, who is a boy that she raises, and somehow work two jobs and somehow make ends meet and somehow take care of these kids and somehow keep them safe, which she doesn't quite know how to do. She's also a white woman raising Black children, which she's trying her best. She's very well-meaning, but she also has blind spots that other people have to point out. And that's also connected to this very particular kind of colonialism that exists in Puerto Rico.
And I mean, the issue of colorism and homophobia it affects everyone in the novel. And there's also, I think there's an activism like Neva's, Nena's activism is quieter, and her mom's activism, like she actually then when she starts working in a factory, they have a strike. And which made me, we're jumping around a little bit, but you manage in this novel to also, with all that you've just said about colonialism and Puerto Rico, but also hit the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s, which I think then is her quiet activism is through her work at the pharmacy through that period. So what did that period mean to you, and how does it? What made you want to include it, especially it's in this young woman's coming of age as a queer woman? And then here's the 90s and AIDS and she's right in the middle of it.
Yeah. Thank you for that question.
The 80s.
So we kind of moved from the early 70s to the 80s to the early 90s. And when Nena goes to Miami, she is a teenager, and at 16 she gets her very first job at a pharmacy and in Miami Beach, which is at the time one of the epicenters of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and a very queer city, a very queer place in the city, which is South Beach also, where people have moved from all over the country to find community as they are dying of AIDS. And one of the things that made me write about this is because we were in this time period, and because the story kind of led me to bring Nena to Miami Beach, it was kind of convenient for me because I was growing up in Miami Beach around that time, and I lived it. I worked in a pharmacy when I was a teenager. I was 16 years old, working as a pharmacy technician. I got the training, and I had no idea what I was doing when I first started. And then suddenly we're in the middle of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and I am queer and closeted, and seeing all the people, meeting new people in my community, meeting gay people for the first time and feel like, oh, wait a minute, I'm among friends and I don't have to hide. And then suddenly everybody starts disappearing. And I didn't know what to do with that. I had no idea how to cope with that, how to process that, knowing that all the people I knew would someday not be here. And it was an entire generation of mostly men, but also a lot of trans women, that as a 16, 17, 18-year-old, I thought, wait a minute, everyone is dying. I was terrified. It was terrifying. And also to not understand, like as a teenager, how much government help could have been given to the community and wasn't, how much queer people in South Beach were ignored, and how the work that was being done was actually done by other queer people. So I decided to write Nena's story, rather than writing memoir, to write Nena's story based on things that I had lived, based on things that were straight out of my life. And then I created characters that were all fictional, but characters that kind of resonated with what was happening at the time. One of the things that I wanted for Nena, who had lived a really difficult life throughout the whole novel, was for her to have a happy ending and for her to get what she wanted finally, which is love. She wanted love and family. She lost the people that meant the most to her. And so in thinking about what Nena has to struggle with during the HIV/AIDS epidemic in Miami Beach, I thought, I don't want her to only know loss. I need her to know love.
Yeah. It felt very, very real, because I remember that period very well. And I think, one thing that you do throughout this book is also allow us to have a view of like a community reaction. And I think one early example is, right, I'm going to do that professorial thing where it's like page 28.
Oh my God, Edwidge is reading my book, y'all.
No. And I loved every moment when that happens, when we suddenly could see the community enter the book in a way. So, and this one says, all these years later, they will all remember this moment, how they stood there watching as the two cops started towards them, trampling the Mori Vivi, which I remember also from your memoir, that covered their front lawns. So it's like the community suddenly shows up. And if you've lived in this kind of neighborhoods, you're like, I know this. Everybody comes out to see what's going on and to also bear witness. And there were so many moments in the book like that where we saw the community show up to either mourn or to, gossip. That's like part of it. So how did you, like, was that something that just popped up, or that was like something purposeful in the writing that you want the community to show up, whether it's in Miami Beach or in Puerto Rico?
Yes and no. So I think I'm always writing about community in one way or another. But in a very purposeful way, I wanted this book to also say something about place. And as I was writing El Caserío Padre Rivera, something about the real place is that it always felt like community. Growing up there, I knew that we were poor. I had no idea how poor we were. But I also knew that I felt rich because I had so many people around all the time, because there was always someone's mother and aunt and cousin watching us all kids playing outside. And it felt very much like we were a community. And I wanted to say something that was real about the place, but I also very deliberately was thinking about, how do I make this place feel like a character? And so the one thing, when people say, the place definitely feels like a character in this book, I didn't just want to say, oh, the place is very present. I wanted the place to have a kind of arc, a story arc. And in order to do that, I had to make it feel alive. And the community was one of the ways that I thought about doing that. The community is very specific to this place. And so I wanted the community to change and be transformed in some way. And you notice in the beginning of the novel that the community shows up for this family. When Rey is wanted by the police, they protect him, they hide him, they feed him. And then, something, I'm not going to give it away, but something happens. There's a kind of reversal. And there's a tragedy, and then rather than showing up, the community turns away. And that to me is supposed to say something about place, definitely about culture and about homophobia, but also about the way that a place changes and is transformed, and much like a character, it changes or is transformed throughout the course of a novel. And you kind of get the sense that these characters living in this place are not the only characters. Like that this place, because there's a community that represents this place, that's also, it feels like a character.
I mean, and speaking of like the tragic thing that we won't name, the book at times is like a mystery, right? And I think that feeling is gained by your like bending of time. And so how do you consider like genre when you're writing? Are you like doing hybridity, or are you doing like...
I think about money. I think what's going to make me the most... No, I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding.
I thought you were going to be like money as genre.
No, I'm gonna be very honest. The first thing I think about when I'm writing, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, is about place. And I'm thinking, where is this gonna be set? And it's almost always in my communities, right? Places I know well, because there's something about the place or the history that I want to explore. And based on that, I think about characters. This novel, I knew that it was going to be set in El Caserío, and I knew very early on that I was going to write about Rey, because I was always thinking about writing about Rey. And I had no idea that what I was writing had a little bit of a thriller or mystery bent. I had no idea. I just let the story take me where it needed to take me. And then through the editing process, I realized I needed to make changes and move things to different places in order for it to work. And it kind of just happened that it feels like there's a mystery to be solved. The book opens with a murder. I'm going to give you a spoiler. The book opens with a murder, and you kind of spend a lot of the book trying to figure out who it was that was killed and how, and then afterward, who did it. And that was not intentional. I didn't intend to set out and write a hybrid literary. No, I don't know. I don't think I could do that work. I'm a lot more interested in people and characters and their stories, and thinking about writing something that's meaningful and that is deeply connected to the history of the place.
So are you one of those writers, like, if you're like, oh, there's a mystery, and like you lean in, or you just kind of like, oh, I'm not sure, or like, let's say you feel like that tinge of the mystery coming, do you like, I'm gonna go full throttle and then I'll come back? And
I reject it. I reject the mystery, because I'm like, that feels too easy. What am I avoiding if I lean into this mystery? I'm a lot more interested in history and language and metaphor. And if there's a mystery, I'm like, oh no, this is gonna take me into a different realm. I think if I'm leaning into mystery, I feel like I haven't done my job in the things I actually am interested in. I haven't done my job as a writer. When I realized that I needed there to be a murder in the book, I definitely struggled against that. And then there were moments when I was writing scenes that were like with men, like there's a police officer who is kind of a villain and does terrible things. And then Rey retaliates and decides he's going to get revenge. And this cop who has done terrible things is going to get his comeuppance. There's a poker game. I guess I'm going to give you spoilers. There's a poker game, and Rey, who is a character, like I said, a very complicated character who's capable of both good and bad, goes into this poker game where this police officer is playing poker and decides he's going to give him some Old Testament justice. And that's all I'm going to say. And that scene was really difficult to write, because it felt like I was like kind of slowly crossing the line into a different genre, and I struggled with writing it. I thought, no, I can't do this. And then I was like, no, actually, I'm gonna let the work take me where it needs to go, rather than trying to control everything. And I do kind of fight the work in some ways, and I think it's the thing about fiction is that you can do whatever you want, and that is really difficult. If it was nonfiction, I'm like, well, I'm not gonna have him give him Old Testament justice because that never happened. But making decisions as a fiction writer can be really difficult, but it also is fun because you get to try all the things before you decide to cut them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking you might have done. So there were so many moments where I wanted to cry, but I think there was a moment where I actually cried was at and it's sort of at the end. It's like Nena stepped closer, kicked off her sneakers, and climbed into her mother's bed, crawling over the bedspread and lying next to her, wrapping her arms around her mother's torso, like she had been when she was little, when her mother read magazines in bed. So they have the mother and daughter have this scene, and I thought, no, the mother, it's not that kind of scene, but it's like a beautiful mother and daughter scene that I thought, oh my gosh, it's like my mother and myself. Was she there? Was she there? And there's that power in those moments, which was so rare for like mothers and daughters who are like struggling so much. So and then a really beautiful revelation is made by the mother there that's like a kind of towards healing. So how much, as like, I know like probably some of your students are here, or some of my students are here, how much in like the process is wrapping up as we like are transitioning towards the audience questions, like what are endings like for you? Are you like haunted by them, or do you wrestle? Do you write like 50 and then like how do you wrap up?
That's a great question. I used to be the kind of writer who was like, I need to know the ending before I write it. I need to know what's going to happen at the end so that I can think of it, like I can think of the writing as a kind of process to get to the end so I can finish the thing. And now I lie to myself and tell myself, I know the ending and I'm writing towards it, but that's just a trick. I don't know the ending. I don't want to know the ending. I want the work to surprise me. And so I draft a lot. I write longhand, just early drafts longhand, and I draft a lot, and I convince myself that I know the ending. But I also leave myself open to the possibility that I don't know anything, that the work is going to teach me what it needs to teach me, and that I'm going to discover something in the writing process. And that discovery is the greatest thing that can happen to an artist, when the work actually teaches you something about yourself, about the world, that the work inspires you. And that to me feels like that's what I want an ending to do. I don't want to know the ending, because whatever ending I came up with in the very beginning is probably terrible compared to the work surprising me and the work kind of guiding me toward what an ending needs to be. But that to me is the hardest thing to write. That's the hardest place to get. I'm pretty good at openings. I'm like, oh, first chapter, got it, did that. And then the middle stuff, I'm like, oh, this will change later, that's fine. And the process of revision gets much more difficult as I get closer to the end of the book. So I rewrote that ending probably 17 times, and struggled because I wanted Nena to have a happy ending, but I didn't want it to feel unearned. I wanted it to also be realistic. And I wanted there to be some healing, but I didn't want it to be perfect. And so writing everything that led up to that scene with the mother-daughter, there are other things, other relationships that never feel quite like there's ever going to be healing. There's no redemption for other characters. But I knew that I wanted, even though their relationship is not perfect, Nena and her mother to kind of be on their way towards healing, if not already there.
So prepare your questions. I'll just ask one more before you all get a chance at your questions. So this book was compared to the Napolitanian series. Are you a Ferrante stan?
Oh, wow, that's a hard question. I love Elena Ferrante. And when that first came up during like an editorial meeting, I was like, oh, yes. All right, let's do this.
I will claim it.
Yeah, I do love Elena Ferrante. I think she should write like 10 more Neapolitan novels. Yeah.
It's now your turn to ask some questions. Someone will travel to you with the mic.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Jaquira. Thank you for inviting us. This
Hi.
is very nice. My question is about place as a project of colonialism. How do you balance place as a project of colonialism while also serving the story that you're telling, rather than just being absorbed in the place?
I thank you so much for that question. I feel like I don't balance it. The balance is already there. I just have to approach it from a place of curiosity and dig and investigate and think about what stories already live there in this place. The places I write about are Puerto Rico and Miami Beach for the most part. I return to Puerto Rico again and again. And I'm not necessarily thinking about balance. I'm thinking about truth and history, and thinking about approaching it from a place of curiosity and what the place can teach me and what I have yet to learn. Even as someone who was born and raised there, even as someone who returns to Puerto Rico 3 times a year and who has family there, I approach it from a place of curiosity and thinking there's so much I still have to learn. Now, thinking about balance is something that happens with like revision. After you've revised a draft of a thing several times, I tend to think of revision as writing in layers and approaching every draft focusing on only one thing that feels manageable. So if I'm working on a draft of revision that is about place, I'm thinking about all the things related to place and setting, such as what setting can do, which is more than just be the place where something happens. Like setting can be metaphor, setting can be a marker of time. A story, a place has an arc, has history, has culture, has language, has music, has all of these things. And so every single draft, I'm thinking about how do I handle only one of those things and work on only one of those things so that it's manageable. And then next time I show up to the page, I'm working on another thing. Revision for me feels like it's very small steps. And that, I guess, achieves some kind of balance. But if I think I must balance this, I'm like, it's never going to happen. Yeah.
Because this novel is like based off of real things, do you find it, you talked about the ending of Nina's like storyline, do you find it like reparative or therapeutic to give a character a happy ending, or at least like an ending that wouldn't be always possible in the real world?
No, I find it much more therapeutic to kill villains.
That's a kind of ending.
Yeah. It feels satisfying in a different way when you finish the project. When, finishing this novel felt satisfying because I felt like, oh, I made art out of all of this history, and that feels satisfying, but it doesn't feel like I've healed anything. All my healing happens in therapy. And I do that first, and then I show up to the page ready to make art, which has nothing to do with my own healing. Other questions?
Thank you so much. This is such a wonderful conversation. I want to go back to the place question a little. Having read your memoir and then reading the novel, I was like, oh, back in Caceria, returning to a universe that I've learned through your writing. I'm not really good at math, and I also don't know exactly how old you are. But I'm thinking,
Very young.
But the novel is set earlier in the same area than the memoir, I think. So by how much, I'm not sure. But did you have to do transformation to historicize the scene for yourself? Or is it a place that's sort of magically always the same in this universe? How did that work?
Oh, I love this question. I teleported to the past. I had to do a lot of archival research. I interviewed a lot of people who lived or still live in El Caserío, and interviewed a lot of family members who lived there in the early 70s. And I was doing this work before for my memoir, and I feel like has always been my research about this particular place for years and years and years. I still have tapes, interviews with my grandmother from 2003. And where I was asking questions because I intended to write nonfiction, and went back to those tapes, and the itty bitty tapes, and listened to them, and was like, oh, there's so much here about El Caserío. And there are archives particularly that I had no idea existed, like the Catholic Church has like records. Yeah. And I go back to Puerto Rico 3 times a year, and I visit El Caserío. And I stay in Humacao, and I stay in Fajardo, and the places that are nearby. And part of my research is looking at old photographs and looking at how the place has changed. There's also a Facebook group of people who grew up in El Caserío sharing photos from like the 1960s. Just photos of their families from like the 1960s, 70s, 80s of growing up there. And when I saw these photos, it was like something cracked open for me, because the place today is so different from what it was. Even when I lived there from 1979 to 1985, it was, the photographs are completely different. And the place today is different. I feel like every 6 or 7 years, it gets a makeover. And it's getting one now as we speak. Like I was just there in March, and half of El Caserío looks like it looked a decade ago, and the other half looks like gentrification is happening actively right now. But I did have to do a lot of work to think about like the early 70s. I was not alive in the early 70s, but do a lot of work to think about like aesthetics, furniture, how people dress, the music, and watching very old videos of like performances of salsa singers performing was really helpful too. Thank you for that question. I also am a research nerd. I love it so much. If I could just do research for a living, I probably would. Hi.
Hi, thank you both so much. I'm wondering if you could talk or just give us some sense of what works you've turned to that have done such a great job of either balancing the kind of talking about, let's say, issues like of colonialism with like making the story keep going, or that have embodied for you like great examples of making place the character, anything that you kind of kept with you as you were working?
Yes. For 2 summers in a row, I reread all of Toni Morrison's fiction, and every single one of her novels to me feels like it does something so important with place, where I feel like, oh, this is definitely a real place that is alive. Reading Edwidge's fiction, I feel that too. And what else have I read? So I actually read Elena Ferrante and felt like, oh, wait a minute, this place, the neighborhood feels a lot like El Caserío. Like it feels like I know this place. I have lived there. And when I'm thinking about colonialism specifically, it's actually not something that I found. I feel like that's lacking, which is one of the reasons why I try to do the work that I do. But there is, I think, hopefully there are a lot of Puerto Ricans that are writing and being translated into English. They're actually doing a lot of work in Spanish that deals with colonialism. There are a lot of short story writers and poets who were during Hurricane Maria writing by candlelight and trying to do that work, like to actually talk about what it's like to live in the middle of a colonial project, living the actual, day-to-day consequences of that. And for example, one of the poets I love, Roque Salas Rivera, has a book that just came out from Grey Wolf, a very big book, and a lot of his poems, I feel like colonialism is alive and well and are also about place.
Are there some older generation folks? I think in your memoir you mentioned Judith Cofer Ortiz.
Judith Ortiz Cofer, yes.
I don't know if you mentioned Rosario, but
Esmeralda Santiago, Rosario Ferrer. Yeah. But I actually avoided all of those books as I was writing this novel because I didn't want to feel like I was copying them. I was like, I need to steer away and reread them some other time. I read Rosario Ferrer's like The House on the Lagoon years and years ago. And I read and continue to reread Esmeralda Santiago's when I was Puerto Rican. And Judith Ortiz Cofer I read when I was like 19 or 20. And I definitely deliberately avoided those writers as I was writing the book, except I reread when I was Puerto Rican, like a year before the book was published, because they asked me to write a preface, the foreword for the book. And I was like, oh, I have to read this again. And I was really scared too, because I thought, oh no, what if this hasn't aged well? And then I reread it and was like, what was I worried about? This is beautiful. I love it. I love it still. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm curious about writing the darker or more negative side of communities that you love and are a part of and feel a need to defend. And just like feeling comfortable adding that layer of nuance and how to incorporate it in like an authentic way.
Oh, thank you for that question. Well, I think everyone should read Edwidge Danticat's Create Dangerously. But one of the things that is really important to me is to make sure that the communities I'm writing about, which are my communities where I came from, that they're actually given allowed their full humanity, right? That I'm not just writing positive things, that I'm actually writing the truth and thinking about, am I being fair? Am I telling the truth? Am I being fair? Am I being just? Am I actually portraying characters as complicated, real people, or do these feel like caricatures? And I never want to write caricatures. So I think it's really important to actually allow everyone their full humanity, even and especially the places you care about. And if you need to critique the places you care about, then that's important. And I felt writing particularly about racism, colorism, and homophobia, I felt I love this community and I love Puerto Rico and I love my people, but we need to talk about this, especially because I'm writing to be in conversation, right? I'm writing to start a conversation, and that's what books do. And so it felt really important to not just show the beautiful things about the place I came from, but also talk about the things that still need to change.
I mean, I would recommend, I was just reading, Jesmyn Ward has a new book coming out, and there's an essay, I think part of it is published in Vanity Fair, where she talks about just that, like, where she said, I will, in the essay she writes so beautiful, she's like, I will brave accusations of poverty porn, I will brave all these, like, accusations of betraying the community because the story must be told. And she's quoting her grandmother who was like, tell it, like, but I think if you write from within a community, there's always that accusation, like airing dirty laundry or giving the larger community things to weaponize against us. That's always kind of the fine line we're working through. And that essay so really beautifully addresses that in her very lyrical way.
Yeah. Jesmyn Ward is an amazing writer. I also, when I read her memoir, as I was writing Ordinary Girls, I thought, oh, I am forever changed. And
Men We Reaped?
Men We Reaped, yeah.
Hi. This question, I'm trying to figure out how to really ask it, but I'm really interested in this idea of like art being the place where you can kill off any villains you want in your life. Villains in terms of like systems, in terms of like institutions or whatever, and art giving you the space to be imaginative. And I'm wondering if you saw that as an opportunity, especially with Ray's character being inspired by someone in real life, if you saw fiction as an opportunity to be more imaginative in terms of what the community could look like in the future, or what things could look like in the future.
Thank you for this question. Lauren is my former student. So I think that's one of the reasons fiction exists, right? So that we can imagine a better future. That's like one of the reasons art exists. Because if we can't imagine a better future, how do we shape a better future? But I also think I don't necessarily think of fiction as the way that I do that. I think more about envisioning a non-fictional future. I very deliberately try to leave that work for nonfiction. I'm writing speculative essays now, and that are being shaped into a memoir where I take leaps of faith and I'm imagining a non-fictional future that is possible, that feels possible and plausible and achievable. Thinking about climate change and thinking about all of these systems that I do talk about in the novel. And part of it is to actually affirm the idea that this future is possible, not just fictional, that it takes communities working together to actually change the world. But I leave that work for nonfiction. It's really important for me to actually affirm this is possible and not just imaginary, not just fictional. But I do know that other writers, fiction writers, novelists work differently. I just prefer to leave that to nonfiction.
We have time for one last question. Or not? Maybe that was the last one. Tell us a little bit more about what you're working on now. We'll close with that.
Oh no, the question of doom. So I am working on nonfiction. I thought it was an essay collection, and it turns out that it's shaping into a memoir. Maybe it'll change again. I'm not sure. But I'm writing about, surprise, I'm writing about Puerto Rico and Miami. But I'm also writing about lots of things that are connected: climate change, music, the future, history and alternate histories, and speculation and ghosts.
Sounds intriguing. See you in a year when it comes up.
Thank you.
Thank you all. The book signing will be over here. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming.